Hello there folks, I'm Dan Brown from a sort of interesting life.com. You're joining me on board good old Narrowboat Tilly on an unbelievably wet day as it has been for goodness knows how long now. You might be able to tell, probably not, that everything I own is currently a little bit wet as I've just been caught running back down to Tilly in a good shower. But today we are going to talk about the continuous cruising rules, and basically I've got a few things I'm going to pull up on the iPad to just outline what the rules actually state. We're not going to talk about what people want the rules to be, or what people think the rules should be, or even what some people try and make the rules mean. We're just going to look at what they actually say, and I'll add in a little bit of commentary as and when needed, a few extra sort of explanations to clarify things, and really we'll just actually talk about that with total isolation, hopefully. Right, without further ado, I suppose first thing I need is my very fancy pair of 99p glasses, which look a little bit wonky, but 99p, once again, what can you say? So I suppose to start off with, we should really sum up what the continuous cruising rules are. So if you don't have a home mooring, for example, you don't keep your boat in a marina, then you're expected to, well, you're classed as a continuous cruiser and you aren't allowed to stay in the same place for more than 14 days. And it's quite an interesting topic, really, and you see some heated debates in these various narrowboat Facebook groups over things like this, as what a place isn't specifically defined. But we're going to look at the proper guidance and stuff in just a second. So that's the basic overall principle, and just to add in a bit more, from the Canal and River Trust on the website, let's have a look. What rules do I have to follow as a continuous cruiser? The law says that you must not stay in the same place for more than 14 days and that you must use your boat bona fide for navigation. In other words, in good faith. If you can't do this easily, you should choose the home mooring option instead. To look down and just see there in a nutshell illustration of what the rules state. Do read the guidance in full, but in a nutshell it explains that you must use the boat to genuinely cruise, and then in brackets from place A to B to C to D, rather than from place A to B to A to B forwards and backwards, basically is what it's saying. You've got to do a linear cruise rather than go, right, I'm going to cruise, but I'm only going to cruise between two places and only ever moor up in those two spots. So to read that sentence without the brackets, do read the guidance in full, but in a nutshell it explains that you must use the boat to genuinely cruise from place to place and must not stop for more than 14 days in any one place. Nice and simply put there. But as I say, it all comes back to this idea of what a place actually is, where there's some confusion and some heated debates, as I say. But if we then look at the actual document entitled, this is, I don't know if it's in shot or not, it's not really important I don't think. Basically this is guidance for boaters without a home mooring. So to put the introduction out there, we're not going to go through all of this, don't worry. If a boat is licensed without a home mooring, it must move on a regular basis. This guidance seeks to explain in day-to-day terms the nature of the movement that must take place. There are three key legal requirements. The boat must genuinely be used for navigation through the period of the licence. Unless a shorter time is specified by notice, the boat must not stay in the same place for more than 14 days, or such longer period as is reasonable in the circumstances. And it is the responsibility of the boater to satisfy the trust that the above requirements are and will continue to be met. So there's a few things to just say about that. When it says about unless a shorter time is specified, that's basically referring to you can stop in any place really for 14 days unless there's signs saying, for example, 48-hour mooring spots where people might be familiar with if you've been on the canal. There's signposts up saying, right, between these two posts you can only spend 48 hours or 72 hours and different time limits of that sort of nature. So that's what it's referring to there. We won't get bogged down in all of the specifics and super legal stuff, as I'm not going to read the entire document out, but I will leave links in the description below for this video to find these links and the documents and stuff so you can peruse them yourself, as this is only me giving you a general overview and any interpretations that I think need to be added in. So when it gets to the place, now this is where it gets really interesting and a little bit tricky, some would say. So, place in this context means a neighbourhood or locality, not simply a particular mooring site or position. So there's our first sentence, and that's basically saying that your place isn't just one specific patch of the canal from the front of the boat to the back of the boat, where, for example, I couldn't say, right, I'm here now in this 30-foot section of canal, and if I move 30 foot up there, look, I'm in a different place. That's the place I was before, and now I'm in this place. That's not how it works. A place is the general, broader local area. But again, we're going to look at this more in depth now. So, let's have a look. Therefore, to remain in the same neighbourhood for more than 14 days is not permitted. The necessary movement from one neighbourhood to another can be done in one step or by short gradual steps. What the law requires is that, if 14 days ago the boat was in neighbourhood A, by day 15 it must be in neighbourhood B or further afield. Thereafter, the next movement must be at least to neighbourhood C and not back to neighbourhood A, with obvious exceptions such as reaching the end of a terminal waterway or reversing the direction of travel in the course of a genuine cruise. Again, a few points of note in there. So firstly, again, it reiterates what we've already said about you can't just go from place A to B and then back to A. It's got to be that more linear travel of actually heading somewhere down in one direction. Equally, it also says, obviously, as you would imagine, if you get to the end of the canal, such as up at Llangollen, then obviously they're not expecting you to drag your boat onto the land and start heaving it continuously up in one direction. To throw in a little bit more here, this is where it gets very interesting. What constitutes a neighbourhood will vary from area to area. On a rural waterway, a village or hamlet may be a neighbourhood, and on an urban waterway, a suburb or district within a town or city may be a neighbourhood. A sensible and pragmatic judgment needs to be made. It is not possible, nor appropriate, to specify distances that need to be travelled, since in densely populated areas, different neighbourhoods will adjoin each other, and in sparsely populated areas, they may be far apart, in which case uninhabited areas between neighbourhoods will in themselves usually be a locality and also a place. Exact precision is not required or expected. What is required is that the boat is used for a genuine cruise. So we've got a lot of information in there to unpack and have a talk about. Now, the first thing I think is interesting is it tells us that from area to area, a place can be defined as a different thing. So, for example, on a rural canal, you could have village, that's a place, a gap of just empty rural fields, that's a place, and then another village, that's a place. But equally, if you were cruising in a city, you could turn up into the city and go through the city and potentially, reading that as I do, go through multiple places that you could spend 14 days without actually leaving the city on the other side until after you'd spent however long you've spent going through. But of course, that's only saying it as on the basis of it can vary from area to area, not that it definitely will vary, or that it definitely is going to be this case every rural place and this case every urban place. On top of that, I thought it's quite interesting on this part that it says it's not possible nor appropriate to specify distances that need to be travelled, because again, it's telling us a lot of things and statements without actually giving us definitive things to work around, really. And again, it's a very tricky situation because, well, it's all based on the BW 1995 Act, I believe, that originally set this out. I mean, that's now 20 years old, and there's been various interpretations and arguments over these things for a long, long time, and I'm sure they will continue to have these. But I just thought it was interesting that they say you can't specify a minimum distance, which ties into the idea of it's showing that you're on a cruise, rather than going, you've been here, 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 that's okay, or you've been here, 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 back again there, and that's not okay. It's more about showing that you're actually travelling somewhere and just basically cruising the canals rather than hanging around these certain spots, I suppose. Well, again, that's just one interpretation and probably a bad way to word it. But you get the general gist now as we're going through this about the vagary and what is specific and what isn't specific. The final thing, like I say, exact precision is not expected, which again just ties into the whole vague thing overall. So that's an interesting little document. Again, I'll leave links to that in the description. Right, before we leave this document, I just want to talk about one last thing here. In the notes, in note 2, it's got an interesting insight into the distance element of this, of how far should you travel. So, if we have a look, the guidelines issued in 2008 were considered by the court in the case of British Waterways versus Davis in the Bristol County Court. The judge expressly found that Mr. Davis's movement of his vessel every 14 days, whilst remaining on the same approximate 10-mile stretch of canal between Bath and Bradford upon Avon, was not bona fide use of the vessel for navigation. So that's quite interesting again, because that tells us 10 miles, which isn't very far really, is definitely not enough basically under those rules and in that little note. So that gives us some insight into, like, yeah, 10 miles over a year, I don't think anybody would really consider as a cruise. But equally, what I found on the Canal and River Trust website, and I'm not sure where this original thing is from, but on the 16th of October 2015, I got this little clipping off the Canal and River Trust site, which says, "How far is far enough? We recognise that boaters want clarity over this. However, the BW Act 1995 does not stipulate a minimum distance. It does set out the requirement to use the boat bona fide for navigation, and the Trust guidance is our interpretation of this requirement. Whilst this means that we cannot set a universal minimum distance for compliance, we can advise that it is very unlikely that someone would be able to satisfy us that they have been genuinely cruising if their range of movement is less than 15 to 20 miles over the period of their licence. In most cases, we would expect it to be greater than this." You're joining me for a little bit of time travel at the moment, as I've just sat down and edited the first section of this video up to this point, and I didn't realise just how long it went on and on, so I've decided to redo a much shorter ending and sum things up a lot quicker. So in regards to that 15 to 20 miles being unlikely to meet their requirements, I'm surprised that it's such a low figure that's quoted, as there'll be a lot of people tuning into this video who will be continuous cruisers and might do 1,000 miles in a year, or at the very least hundreds and hundreds of miles, thinking, heck, 10 miles? 20 miles? What's this all about? That's what we do in a day. And similarly, I suppose, to put that in context for my own cruising, in the first month that I left my winter mooring in 2015, just in April, I'm sure it was about 27 or 28 miles that I travelled in that month. So again, easily in 1 month of a 12-month licence, I'd gone well over that estimate of what's unlikely to be enough. And then on top of that, there's probably, well, I suppose really, let's wrap this video up pretty sharpish. If you've watched this far, then well done and thank you. Really, my own thoughts on this whole thing are just basically, be sensible. It's like, there's people who want real strict rules, and there's people who want total openness, and you can stay where you want for as long as you want, and so on. And I think it's all got to be about that sensible middle ground, where you can say, right, if you're moored up in the middle of nowhere, and 3 dog walkers a day might even know you exist, then you're obviously causing no problem, and you're no harm, and if you're just going about your life, then that's fine, and just keep doing your cruising 14 days, whatever your rules are at that point. But equally, it's important to say that some of these cities and some of these busier places aren't congested with boats that just stay there indefinitely, so that if you have people who are on holiday or cruising around genuinely, they can't get to services and supplies and things that they need to continue their cruise. And that, again, I think, I've seen people complain about that in the various cities, but something that would be a good example, if, say, somewhere like Ellesmere, where it's one of the very few places on the canal up here that the canal goes right up to the shops, basically. So it's very easy to get supplies on board and stuff from that area, but if for any particular reason a load of boats suddenly decided, right, for goodness knows how far down the towpath in every direction, we're all going to stop here for a couple of years on end and not have any rule regulating that, then anybody turning up and wanting some supplies is going to have a good old walk. And if you're wanting to get water bottles or, I don't know, heavy items, bags of coal and stuff, it could make it very difficult and tricky. Now, it's fine for me to still be just about fit enough to hop on my bike and do these like 10-15 mile round trips sometimes to get supplies. Or you've seen these videos I've done in the past where I walk up and off down the canal for hours on end and then arrive back with something to eat for me tea. That's all fine for me, who's just about fit enough to do it all. But you've got to consider that there's a lot of people who aren't and just don't want to. So you've got to consider everybody, and everybody needing access to supplies and things like that at some point. And just really keeping a general sort of flow of Canal going in terms of, well, it's not just some people dominate one area and don't let anybody else get in, basically. So, I don't know, there's all sorts of things to be said on this. Those are just a few thoughts, and I'm really disappearing into the shadow as the sun's lit up the back of the boat. So, I will wrap things up now and say thanks for watching. Check the links in the description to find some of the various documents and websites I've talked about. Feel free also, if you like these videos and want to help me out, or just want a nice, pleasant, short read, please do check out my short boat life books. You'll find links to those in the description, as well as my Facebook and Twitter and Facebook page, all that sort of stuff. Like those if you want to see loads of boaty pictures and so on. But until the next time, as always, keep it boat worthy, have a fantastic day, and of course, farewell.